So now let's look at verse number 5 and continue studying Genesis chapter 6. So let's go to Genesis 6 chapter 5. This time I'm reading from the King James Version. It says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Now, notice that that passage emphasizes the invisible elements of the human experience. It says here, God saw that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So that shows that God is interested in the heart. He goes beyond the physical, visible actions that we may carry out each day that may be visible by the human eye, and he goes to the intention. So even if something looks nice and good on the outside, it may be deemed evil by God, because he will see something in the intention behind the action that will be unpleasant to him. And as we've seen before, the Spirit judges things differently from the soul. The soul may see it as okay, but the Spirit will see something beyond that and judge it and label it and declare it as evil. Like, for example, with Cain and Abel. Cain was offering sacrifices to God. He would take from his crop, and he would go and give a part of his crop over and sacrifice to God. That looked like a good thing. It looked like a pious and devoted religious action towards God. But God saw the intention of his heart. He saw that Cain was doing it because he wanted to be approved by the world as being the most pious and the most religious person of his days. And when he saw that Abel was doing something different, and that God was pleased with him and not with Cain, with himself, he became angry. And that showed the motivation, one of the motivations behind his giving. He was giving out of the abundance of his crop, and Abel was giving from within him. He was giving blood. He was giving. When he gave a lamb, the lamb would die, and that little animal would not produce anything anymore. But when Cain came and brought the vegetables, he could bring all the vegetables he wanted, but he still had the plants back at his field, producing more vegetables. So he was giving out of the abundance, out of the overflow of his production. But when Abel came and gave a lamb, he was giving everything, because once the lamb died, there was no more wool that you could get from that lamb, from that sheep. When you gave the sheep, that if it was a female sheep, for example, it wouldn't be able to have little sheep afterwards, and if it was a male sheep, it would not be able to impregnate other sheep. So once the sheep died, it was gone. So it's a figure of someone giving all of himself, not giving out of the abundance. And Cain had a different attitude. He just wanted to give enough to impress people and to make people feel that he was more pious, more religious than his brother Abel or anybody else. That's what God saw. And that type of dichotomy between what you see on the outside and what's going on the inside happens each and every day in the human experience. And it happens in the church. And that's why there are a lot of people who have deceived themselves into thinking that the church is okay. Well, they might agree that there are a few problems here and there, but they believe that fundamentally the church is okay. Why? Because they are judging the church from a soul perspective, and they are unable to see the things in the heart. That's what God cares about, the heart. He wants to see the philosophy by which you live your life, the philosophy or the intention behind your actions. And if they're not in accordance with the Spirit, if they're in accordance with the soul, then God is not going to be pleased with them, and He's going to be angered and frustrated and bothered by them. So, so that this emphasizes that God looks at the invisible attitudes, the attitudes that lead to all the troubles in the world, something that the church has refused to understand. Now, let's go to verse 6. Genesis 6:6. It says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." Now, this shows something about God, something very important that most people in the church don't understand. That God is not a feel-good God. God is not totally obsessed with happiness the way the church is, the way most believers are. The Lord had me flipping through channels yesterday, coincidentally, and he kind of drew my attention to a specific channel that I rarely watch. And on that channel, they had a person who was talking about ways to take control over your life. It was like a self-help type seminar situation where this man was standing on a platform, and he was talking to a group of people. And one of the things he said, which kind of bothered me, he said some very interesting things, and I was beginning to get, in a way, I was feeling myself enveloped in the words that this man was giving. But then he said something that drew my attention and bothered me when he said, "God is good, and goodness and God are the same thing." So far, that sounds good. But then he said something. If it doesn't make me feel good, it can't be from God, because God is good. And when he started, and everybody in the audience began to clap and everything, because it sounded so logical. It sounded like a logical sequence. But unfortunately, the moment he injected the word "feel" into the sentence, he distorted the logic. Because if something doesn't, because that means that you're basing your understanding on emotion. And he was trying to get people to believe in their hearts that anything that brought grief, that brought sadness, that brought anger or a sense of upset, that those things could not be from God, because God is quote-unquote good. So that would mean that anything that took away my happiness, and that he mentioned that word constantly, that happiness is not that you don't have to look for the way to happiness. Happiness is the way, and all of that sounds so nice, so new age, so positive. But the problem is that when you start focusing on that, you get a distorted understanding of reality, of what God is all about, and that's the problem with the church. The church is looking for a feel-good God, a God who never gets angry, who's always calm and happy and in control, and that's not God. Look at verse 6 again. It says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." Is grief a good emotion? I think most of us would catalog it as a bad emotion, as a manifestation of something bad going on. Does that mean it was not from God? Well, if it was not from God, how can God feel grief if grief is not from God?